Hey guys, Spartan here. Welcome to a tier maker thing, because as if everybody in the world hasn't done these, and that's probably because it's a good format. I will be ranking the heroes of Darkest Dungeon based on how good they are in Butcher's Circus. Now this is relative to other heroes. Yes, I know tons of these heroes are very, very viable. This is just in relations to other heroes, which is why there's nothing less than D here. And also because, I just kind of grabbed the first Darkest Dungeon related one I could. But, anyways, let's start. So, the Abomination. The Abomination is a very flexible unit, especially considering the fact that he has 7 skills that you can use. And you can just switch between forms if you want to switch between, melee or ranged. The problem with the Abomination is that, well, it's better than in the base game, because he can transform into his beast form and back twice each. So, yeah, it says he has 4 uses of the transform skill, 1 to transform, 1 to change back, and one of those uses does get used up if he gets stressed out and changed back from beast form to human form. So, he has some really good moves. Slam is an incredible move skill, especially considering one of his trinkets adds 15 accuracy. No, not 15 accuracy, 15 move skill chance, and an extra 10% damage to that. I believe that the Abomination goes into A tier. He isn't the best hero in the game. He's top of A tier, and maybe he belongs in low S tier, just because of how flexible he is. He has a stun, he has a riposte, he can stress heal himself and heal himself at the same time. Rage does a ton of damage, and Rake is good AoE. There's just no real problem with him, except he is pretty much useless in slot 4. So, if he gets moved, which he doesn't have too much move skill outside of Abomination form, he can be a bit screwed over, especially considering the fact you want to place him in slot 2. Antiquarian. Antiquarian is not a joke in this game, as opposed to how she was in the base game. Festering Vapors is very good at proccing Death's Door checks. She has the dodge buff build, which is actually very viable considering the fact that not many people like to run huge accuracy buffs, and considering that Bolster from the Manatarms lasts a whole round, she is very, very viable. Also, due to the way that Death's Door works, regen can be very, very helpful if your opponent is not running, AoE damage over times. Basically, her little regen can take you off of Death's Door when it comes to be your turn. So, it can be very useful for stalling reasons. So, Antiquarian belongs solely in B tier, because she doesn't do much for the first half of the fight, but for the second half she's pretty damn useful. She's good for finishing the game off. Now, Obelisk and Antiquarian, they go together because there's very little difference between them. Yeah, there are some minor differences, but it's mostly to, the Obelisk has 5% protection, Musketeer has 1 more HP. So, it's, very little difference between them. The trinkets are a bit different. I don't even remember which one it was, but one of them's heal move cures bleed, and the other one adds the health restored buff. And I know one of the trinkets for the Obelisk adds protection to her, and the one for the Musketeer cures Blight on heal. I'd just like to say that the Obelisk and Musketeer from Butcher's Circus is what the Obelisk and Musketeer from the game should have been. They have great trinkets, they actually deal a ton of backline damage, and they're just very, very good. Plus Bowler lets them move back when they get into the very front lines, and it can be used from slot 3 as well, so that's nice. Helps rearrange, which is the biggest problem for the Musketeer and Obelisk, is that they can't do shit in the front lines in the base game. So, yeah, they're fairly decent in that regard. I would say that the Obelisk and Musketeer are still only at B tier, but they're close to being A tier. The only thing that would have been better is if their move that removes stuns and dazes and debuffs had some extra buff, like it removed some stress or something, which is very prominent in Butcher Circus. Bounty Hunter, hey, how's it going? Bounty Hunter is pretty much the default kill enemy on death's door unit, considering the fact that Finish Him has plus 50 death blow chance. So combined with the finisher, it's a 100% chance to kill someone on death's door, aside from the Flagellant. Now that's the main move that the Bounty Hunter really uses. The other main moves that you'd see a Bounty Hunter run are Come Hither, which is because pulling backline units, such as, like, say, for example, the Vestal to the front lines can be very deadly to them, and it can ruin units that want to be in the back lines, but not the very back lines, such as the Abomination. And you'll also see them run Caltrops, but that's just because it's 2 bleed every round for 25 rounds. It's a very slow bleed out, but it does add extra 5% stress, so it does that too. It also has really good accuracy, and a crit from it is not an uncommon sight, considering the fact that it just has a decent crit rate and it hits all enemies. So yeah, it's a good way to start a stress round. Bounty Hunter overall is a very solid unit. The only downside is its attack damage isn't really that high, and he relies on marks like the other heroes that rely on marks, but less so because, like, every Bounty Hunter is going to run to Finish Him. That's the default. Come Hither is also almost mandatory because of how good it is. And a lot of Bounty Hunters like to run Caltrops, so you have one other move. Flashbang is pretty useless, so you could either run the Mark, or you could run, like, Collect Bounty. And Collect Bounty doesn't deal, like, extra damage to humans, because every unit in the game is a human, aside from maybe the Abomination in Abomination form. So, Bounty Hunter's pretty good, I guess. He belongs in A tier merely because of the fact that Finish Him is such a good finisher. And when your opponent has a Bounty Hunter, you have to constantly be thinking, oh, can I take this character's turn now? Because if I end the turn and he's on death's door still, he's dead from a, like, Bounty Hunter taking his turn and finishing him. Crusader. Crusader is a pretty good unit. Crusader is nice and flexible. The main problem with the Crusader is that he doesn't have much of a strict build that he does. He's very flexible, but that is a good thing to some people. Like, sure, units like the Hellion are like, okay, damage, 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 damage. The Crusader can heal, he can stress heal, he can move to the front lines with Holy Lance, he can do stress with Zealous Accusation, Smite is good, and he can stun with Stunning Blow. Also, he can buff the whole party for 20% protection at the start of the match. That's really good. The Crusaders, also with Rally to the Flame, which is his heal, is a move that can remove 2 units from Death's Door, himself and the unit he uses it on, which is also a huge asset, something that I underestimated during my first days of playing Darkest Dungeon, but it is a very good ability to have, and I would recommend running it every time you have Crusader. Holy Lance also does a ton of damage, it has nice crit rate, and a crit from Holy Lance can turn the whole battle in your favor. It is incredibly... I wouldn't say it's luck-based, but when it does work, it works really well, and for that, I'm putting Crusader at least... I'd say the bottom of S tier. I'd say that these two are kind of interchangeable, the Crusader and the Abomination, but they're both very good. Do not underestimate either of these units. So, Flagellant. Flagellant is a very conflicting unit, as in the Flagellant needs to take damage, otherwise he isn't really that useful. He has the lowest damage in the game at 4 to 9, and he has a bunch of buffs that say increase damage during this situation, like when he's on Death's Door or something. The problem with those are, it's a good buff. It's a good buff to a small amount. So, like, obviously, you know, what's 25% of 10? That's 2.5, yeah. What's 10% of, say, 20? That's 2. So, smaller buffs on bigger numbers are better, but, you know, that's just how general math works. So, Flagellant, he has really good skills, but they, of course, rely on him being at low health or Death's Door or something like that. One thing that you need to take note of is that if you attack all enemies at once, put them all on Death's Door, but the Flagellant is like in the front line or something like that, or pretty much anywhere actually, if it's right, but it only matters really for stress in that case. If the Flagellant goes to Death's Door at the same time as anyone else, he will heal every other unit that they have, So if you reduce them all down to 0 HP, and the 3 units that aren't the Flagellant have a heart attack, then they will not die because they'll be healed, and then they'll have heart attacks and lose their last little scrap of health they get from the good old Flagellant. Main problem with Flagellant: people do not like to attack with the Flagellant. If your opponent is not running like super AoE build, the Flagellant doesn't do you much good unless you run Reclaim to deal damage to the Flagellant, which isn't really that good of a skill. So, I'm sorry Flagellant, you're very powerful, you have great potential, but everyone will just kill you last because of how not very good you are in PvP. PvE, Flagellant is S tier, but in PvP, Flagellant just doesn't cut it. Graverobber has good damage. Graverobber can blight. Graverobber's panic darts deal a lot of stress damage at 30, and the Graverobber can stealth herself, which is very important. Like, stealth plus panic darts is a 45 stress combo, and you'll want to be using Shadow Fade with her to move backwards into the back line so you can lunge or something. And lunge is also a very good skill because it adds extra death blow chance. Plus, like, I'll give you an example of a build that I was running. So I was running Abomination in slot 1, Graverobber in slot 2, Manatarms in slot 3, and Occultist in slot 4. Now, if you were facing this comp, your first response would be, oh, I need to pull the Occultist to the front because that'll put the Manatarms in the back row, which can't do much, and I'll have the Occultist in the front where I can smash them. Every single turn 1 that I would take with that, after Occultist being pulled, would result in lunge, mostly critting an enemy and putting the fight greatly in my favour, as it also pushes the Occultist back to slot 3. That's a very good ability right there, and lunge probably fits in every single build because of just how good it is. Thrown Dagger isn't really that good. Picture the Face is situational. Picture the Face is pretty much the insurance thing you take if you, like, have Graverobber as the last unit alive and you need to kill an enemy. It pierces protection, I guess, so it's not useless. Graverobber is a pretty good unit. I'd say that Graverobber is not as good as Antiquarian, but is better baseline than the Obelisk and the Musketeer, so Graverobber is good, but is not as good as certain other units. Hellion. Hellion is a unit that I thought was going to be a lot better, but the problem with Hellion is that Hellion's damage doesn't really... It just isn't really that good. Like, Hellion had a lot more damage in the base game, but they kind of nerfed her, so now you pretty much only see Hellions using Barbaric Yorp, or Threatening Yorp, or whatever it's called. Either that, or they'll use it for Breakthrough to move back to the front lines. So, yeah. If it bleeds is a nice skill, but it has too much negative damage. Just ignore that pop-up there if you saw it. And Wicked Hack is nice, especially to kill a unit with that extra death blow chance, but the Hellion is just... The Hellion just has too many problems with her. Sure, she has good stun resist, which is nice. I don't believe she has great move resist, but she can move back to the front lines from the back lines anyway. So, yeah, she's more of an auxiliary damage unit, and why would you really bring auxiliary damage units when you could probably just bring another main damage unit? She's just, yeah. Stress build, she isn't that bad. The accuracy minus debuff she applies can be good if you're running Antiquarian Man-at-Arms dodge build. It's very reliable. But other than that, she's better than the Flagellant, but she just isn't as good as some of the other units. I personally run Obelisk and Musketeer over them. Highwayman. Highwayman is actually pretty good. Highwayman's Vendetta skill is something that you will definitely need if you're running up against Antiquarian dodge tank build, which is pretty viable. So, what Vendetta does, in case you've never used it before, and to that I say, why have you never used it before, is it gives the Highwayman an extra damage, accuracy, and crit buff. It means he can ignore stealth for the rest of the battle, and the enemy he uses it on loses 20 dodge permanently. You cannot remove the dodge debuff. So, it is a very, very good skill to use on a dodgy unit like a Shieldbreaker, Antiquarian, Graverobber, or maybe even the Hellion. Some unit you absolutely need to kill. that has high dodge. Highwayman's also has a riposte. Ripostes are better than the Flagellant because I'll give you the example of the most common AoE move that actually does damage. The Houndmaster's Hound's Harry. That does like 1 to 3 damage maybe, and if you use that on the Flagellant, it's not going to do much. Sure, it's going to deal some damage over time, but it's not going to really tick the Flagellant off into really bad shapes. But the Highwayman's riposte, or just any riposte in fact, is a definite threat to AoE moves that deal damage, because the Highwayman can deal about 10 damage on average on a riposte, and that's without a crit. So a crit from the Highwayman's riposte can deal a lot of damage, and it is genuinely a threat to units that use AoE as their main source of damage. I have lost games due to the fact that I'm using an AoE build and there's a Highwayman who's got a good riposte up. Especially considering the fact that the Highwayman has a riposte trinket that increases all his melee stats, and yes, that does work for the riposte. Plus, the riposte itself gets buffed, so Highwayman just is really good for that. Also, he's got Wicked Slice. Wicked Slice is good for killing enemies. You've got Grape Shot, which is a great stress move that everyone underrates because it does actual damage as well, which is a benefit. It's a benefit because you can take him on death's door and then stress him out even more. It's a really good move. Point Blank Shot has a good move back from the front line. It does a lot of damage. It has extra death blow chance. And Duelist Advance, while it can't hit slot 4 like it can in the base game, it can still work from any rank and hit up to slot 3 of the enemy team. Like, how could you not run this unit in a bunch of your things? The only bad move I consider he has is Open Vein, but Open Vein is still decent for bleed chance. It's good for killing Man-at-Arms and units with high protection. I'd say Highwayman is in A tier, above Bounty Hunter at least, because sure, Bounty Hunter's used to kill enemies, but the Highwayman can do that too with Wicked Slice. So, he's not as effective for that, but he's effective throughout the fight more so than just the Bounty Hunter for killing enemies. Houndmaster, oh boy, I'm gonna get some flack for saying this, but the Houndmaster is really not as good as people think he is. Sure, the Houndmaster is good in some regards, but he's not as good as people think he is. How many actual moves do you see people use with the Houndmaster? I see them use 3 moves. Hound's Harry, Lick Wounds if they're on Death's Door, and Blackjack. That's the only 3 moves that I see Houndmasters actually use, and for good reason. The other skills kind of suck. Hound's target, or whatever it's called, the primary attack, it does good damage to marked enemies, but it doesn't do as much damage as the Musketeer or Arbalist do, or even the Bounty Hunter in that. Like, sure, you could use him for slot 2 attacking, but the problem with him is if he gets moved to slot 1, he can't use his primary skill, so that's very bad, so you'd want to put him in the back lines, but the Antiquarian and... no, not the Antiquarian, the Arbalist and Musketeer are better at the back lines than he is. Hound's Harry, it does do decent stress, I guess, and bleed and deal a tiny bit of damage, but it loses to ripostes, and if you see your opponent... if your opponent sees you running Houndmaster, Hound's Harry, they're going to stack as many ripostes as they can to counter that. So, Man-at-Arms will probably start riposting, Highwayman will probably start riposting, even the Abomination will start riposting, because Abomination's riposte is better than a lot of people give it credit for, because it applies like 20 stress on riposte. So, yeah. Guard Dog would be okay, but now, like, in the higher up ranks at least, you will see bloody Abomination and Shieldbreaker in every game to break guards. So, sure, you're applying 20 dodge to the Houndmaster. Doesn't matter because the Houndmaster isn't very threatening itself. So, sorry Houndmaster, you're going in D tier because you're just not effective as any of the other units. Also, Blackjack is not really as effective as other heroes who have stuns, who actually have buffs to those stuns, like the Crusader has a stunning trinket, the Abomination has a stunning trinket. Pretty sure, like, who else has the stunning trinket? The Vestal. The Vestal is a stunning trinket too. So, yeah, Vestal is a better stunner than the fucking Houndmaster, and that's sad. Jester. Jester is a very conflicting unit, considering the fact that Jester can potentially kill a unit from full HP immediately, and the Jester is also a very fragile unit. So, Jester... Battle Ballad is a very good skill the Jester can use, because 20 accuracy and a bit of crit is absolutely nothing to scoff at, especially considering the fact that dodge builds can be very viable, and one of the best trinkets in the game, I also underrated, is the Monkey's Paw, because that extra little dodge and accuracy, at the cost of just some stress and a potential crit increase taken, that's actually really crazy good. Because, sure, units don't have super high accuracy like they did in the base game at times. They're often lower than average, and units like the Jester or the Graverobber who have high dodge, if you stack a Monkey's Paw on them, usually they'll be able to dodge tank in this mode. Because, sure, unless your opponent's running Jester Battle Ballads, there's a good chance they won't be able to hit you, because how many people have you seen running Suspicious Eye, or other trinkets that increase accuracy, aside from Monkey's Paw, which gives more dodge than accuracy? Not many people, honestly. So the Jester is a very conflicting hero. Finale is, of course, the big benefactor to this. The Jester also can counter stress builds, considering the fact that the Jester's has the strongest stress heal at 30. So, yep, Jester is pretty good. With Brass Bugle, that's a 45 stress heal. You could dedicate the Jester to full stress heal job, but that's a bit unnecessary. I'd say the Jester is... he's not S tier. You know what? Screw it. Abomination belongs in S tier, at least low S tier. And the Jester belongs about here. I keep sleeping on the Abomination. But yeah, he belongs there. Leper, D tier. I'll tell you why. Because he just doesn't have enough move resist to make himself viable. He also doesn't have a move that moves him back into the front slot. One of the biggest problems with the Obelisk and Musketeer is the fact they couldn't move back to the back line in the base game. Now Bowler moves them backwards, which makes them a whole lot better. The Leper has nothing like that in this game. Sure, Leper has crushing damage, but instantly loses to any enemy comp that has move skills. Unless... there's one situation where the Leper doesn't die, and that's if the rest of your team is like a Graverobber, a Shieldbreaker, and some other backline unit that can move really quickly. In which you can move the Leper back to the front line. But at that point, you're dedicating your entire 3 people to helping this one unit. And Leper's accuracy is really not good in this mode. Sure, Leper has accuracy buff trinkets, but they're not that good. He doesn't have enough dodge to make the Monkey's Paw be really worthwhile running, because, oh yeah, 15 dodge on a unit that has 0 dodge. It really doesn't work. Because dodge is a case of where the more you stack, the better it gets. It's not diminishing returns, it's increasing returns. So, yep. Sorry, Leper, but your self-sufficiency is not good enough to help yourself here. His protection skill is pretty good, but other than that, no. Just no to the Leper. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, we have the Man-at-Arms, who is undoubtedly the most broken unit in the game. Yep. On week 1, pretty much everyone posted the fact that the Man-at-Arms is the most overpowered unit in the game, or, well, the least fun, due to the fact that he'd just shout at you, and shout at you, and shout at you, and do nothing else. Actually, no, he would bolster on turn 1 and then start shouting. So Bellow is pretty much the move that carries the Man-at-Arms to relevancy. It is 12 stress to the entire enemy team, and it debuffs them by 20% damage for 3 rounds. So, at 20% damage minus means that a lot of your units, if your opponent's trying to run damage build, Man-at-Arms pretty much just kills them right there, because they will not be able to outdo the damage reduction that the Man-at-Arms implies if they have at least one healer. And say, for example, Crusader's heal. Crusader's heal could be good enough to keep them alive. Plus, you can stack stress trinkets on the Man-at-Arms, and it'll greatly increase that eventually. Man-at-Arms also has a trinket that increases accuracy and debuff chance and crit. So, Bellow just becomes a lot easier to use if you have extra accuracy and debuff chance. It's just crazy strong. You don't even need to pay attention to any other Man-at-Arms skills, because that's all that people use. He has a guard as well, sure. But nobody really pays attention to that because guard breaking exists. But if your opponent doesn't have a guard, you can pretty much save your Occultist or Shrimpy Plague Doctor in the back lines there from lethal damage really easily. Man-at-Arms probably needs to be nerfed, especially with Pit Fighter's Helm, which exists, which grants 20% protection, stacks with the Man-at-Arms as base protection, and it's just... in the end, you get this unit that can't be killed except from by stress, or, like, heavy damage over time. But that's not going to happen usually, because people run Plague Doctor with Man-at-Arms. Occultist. Occultist is an interesting unit. He is very flexible. Stygian Embrace, the new skill he got for Butcher's Circus, is incredibly viable, especially considering you can stack it on Man-at-Arms or other stress-based units. And it just goes crazy. So how good is the Occultist? Well, considering a lot of people don't make builds without the Occultist, I'd say that the Occultist is probably somewhere in S tier, maybe behind the Man-at-Arms. Yeah, that makes sense. So, Occultist can pull. He's got a trinket that increases pull chance, or, yeah, you effectively just pull chance. It increases accuracy, it increases the duration of horror, which is applied from the pull skill. The Fleshbound Tome is just a very, very good trinket that kind of makes the Occultist the Occultist. It also works with Abyssal Artillery. Abyssal Artillery is also a very good skill because, in essence, it applies 8 stress, but then it applies 8 stress per round for 3 rounds. So that's applying 32 stress to 2 units for this one attack. That's crazy. That's 64 stress. And if you're running the Fleshbound Tome, it adds an extra 8 to each, effectively. So, yeah, it's just stupidly high amounts of stress from one move, if you're running stress build. Weakening Curse is good, it reduces protection, it adds 30 stress, it reduces damage. Vulnerability Hex is a good mark that adds stress and reduces dodge. It's good for destroying dodge builds. Like, I can't think of a single bad move for the Occultist, because Sacrificial Stab, even, it adds death blow chance to afflicted enemies. Like, that's also crazy. It works, it has the same attack range as Finish Him from the Bounty Hunter. It's slightly worse, pretty much. Except until the Occultist gets a certain trinket of his that makes Sacrificial Stab mark enemies as well, which makes it a super, super powerful ability. It's just like, why? The Occultist is so strong, and the only downside is that he has a bit of low health. But he can heal upwards of 66. If you're lucky, sure. The only downside of the Occultist is that he can screw you over with bad heals. But that's really not an issue, because even a heal of 1 point is enough to take you off death's door, which will save you from a death blow. Like, you only need 1 heals, which is kind of why the Antiquarian's regen is pretty good. I may even buff Antiquarian Spawn on this list to A tier. Plague Doctor. Plague Doctor is very good. Probably the strongest backline unit there is. The problem with the Plague Doctor is, once again, loses to move skills. The Plague Doctor can pretty much do nothing in slot 1. If you get a Plague Doctor to slot 1, you waste the enemy's turn, and they are useless. The main play that people seem to use with the Plague Doctor is they use Stygian Embrace from the Occultist to give the good old buddy, yeah, they give the Plague Doctor stealth, and then you can't pull the Plague Doctor, so they just use Blinding Gas to deal a ton of stress. Blinding Gas, crazy good stress move, by the way. The only real counterplay to this is to use, well, considering the fact that the Plague Doctor likes to stay in slot 4, the real only counterplay is to use a pull skill with a unit that has the Occult Eye, or whatever it's called, the thing that lets you ignore stress. Not stress, ignore stealth. So, you don't see people do that much. And the only de-stealth move that's very viable is the Houndmaster's, no, the Houndmaster's, the Highwayman's. Highwayman's Vendetta, which is good to use on the Plague Doctor, because the Plague Doctor is kind of dodge-based. They have no protection. So, if you have Highwayman, save Vendetta for when they stealth the Plague Doctor. It will be worth it, trust me. You waste their turn, you get your buff. It's really good. Plague Doctor is pretty good, but I wouldn't say they're A tier. I'd say they're high B tier. Are they better than the Graverobber? They are probably better than the Graverobber, but they need your team to help with them. I'm still not putting Antiquarian above me, not even with the Horror Antiquarian build. Shieldbreaker. Shieldbreaker is a solid A. Mostly because Puncture exists, and Puncture is just crazy. Crazy As in, it sure only does a tiny amount of damage. Shieldbreaker's damage output in this game is low. But it's a pull 2, it's very reliable. It can be used from any slot, and it can hit any slot, which means it is literally the most effective space-wise unit. Like, the Shieldbreaker can be used to patch up units, not units. The Shieldbreaker can be used to patch up comps that have poor move chance or move resist, because the Shieldbreaker just does everything. The only problem with the Shieldbreaker is she has low damage, but she can use damage over times to whittle down enemies like the Manatarms or other protection-heavy units like Crusader. She is very, very good as a unit. Another very good benefit for Shieldbreaker is that you can't really kill her first, due to the fact that she has Serpent Sway. Serpent Sway effectively gives the Shieldbreaker 2 blocks, meaning that the first 2 times the Shieldbreaker will take damage while she's got that up, she will take no damage, and she cannot be killed while on death's door while she has blocks up. Serpent Sway also is very deceptive in like, oh, okay, I just need to use any 2 skills to hit the Shieldbreaker. No, you cannot do that, because the Shieldbreaker gets 15 dodge for 3 rounds while using Serpent Sway. That is a deceptively high amount of dodge to give a unit that already has very high dodge. So dodge tank Shieldbreaker on death's door with Serpent Sway is a very dangerous thing to have, especially if your opponent is running dodge build, which I've given the praises of quite enough. But yes, Shieldbreaker, pretty good unit. I would consider running her if you needed a shifter damage type dealer. And finally, we have Vestal. Vestal is obviously a very good unit with the healing. The only problem with Vestal is she can't do anything really from rank 1. She has Mace Bash, she has Illumination, she has Hand of Light. Those skills aren't really that good. Actually, no, Illumination is pretty good. It does low damage, but it applies stress, and it does debuff dodge by a large amount. The only problem is Illumination is pretty bad accuracy from what I remember. So, who is the Vestal better then? Well, the Vestal is a healer, so most likely you want to run one healer. She counters AoE damage builds with her heal, if you buff it a little bit. Except for, like, maybe the Houndmaster's Hound Harry. She can ward off Caltrops. That's something works. She can cleanse horror with Divine Comfort. No, not Divine Comfort. Divine Grace. Which, I don't think people pay any attention to the fact that horror can be cleansed. Because it can. Like, she is one of the 2 units that can do that. So, Vestal, let's just think about it. She's better than these 2. She's better than the Graverobber, the Plague Doctor. She is better than the Antiquary. She's better than the Man-at-Arms, definitely. She's probably better than the Shieldbreaker. She may very well be better than the Jester. Is she better than the Highwayman, though? Is she better than the Highwayman? Yes, you know what? I would say she is slightly better than the Highwayman, merely because healers are very good. Maybe I should fix up this tier list a bit, because it's looking very top heavy, but that's just because a lot of these units are very, very reliable. You know what? Sure, I'll put the Musketeer and the Arbalist in C tier because of the fact that they also rely on other units. I'd still say this looks very good, though. I am happy with this tier list. So, D are still, you can still use them, but they are not as good as any of the other units. C is slightly viable. You can make these into comps. They do work just fine. B is a bit more viable. They work at least. Like, you may consider putting them as your 4th unit. A is like standard. You can just slot these into any comp, really, and they'll work. They're fine. And S tier is like top tier ranking. Like, I'm pretty sure this comp right here would be like a top tier comp. It can stress, it can deal damage. This is probably the best comp if you like just replaced. If you just did if you did this. There, that's an actual comp that you can run. That'll most likely win you games, but it's not how the tier list actually works. So, yep, that's my thoughts on the Darkest Dungeon tier list. If you think there's anything wrong with this, or if you bring up a factor that I forgot, or that you think I forgot, like the Houndmaster's Cry Havoc, I didn't forget about it, it's just not that good. If you think I forgot something, please address it in the comments, and I'd like to see how you would balance your tier list, but yeah. This list is also highly subjective because it's me, and like, air is human and everyone is biased. And based on what, you may ask, yeah. So, I hope you enjoyed this tier list, and I'll see you guys in the next video that I do. Goodbye.